everyone. My name is Kris. I am with GeekChic Promotions. RuthAnn cannot be here today since she's at LA Comic-Con working the Aftershock booth. But who I have with me as a special guest today is Marcus Perry, and he's going to be talking about the movie Joker with me today. So Marcus.
What's up? We're excited to talk about this.
That's right. We have with us here some vodka sodas that we're going to be drinking. Congrats.
Yay.
Hooray. All right, so let's delve into this. We saw this movie last night, and by the way, spoilers, lots of spoilers during this, so if you haven't seen it, we are going to be spoiling a lot of stuff, so you might want to turn it off now.
But it's also the second weekend into release, so I feel like it's fair game. It's
That's
already
right.
been spoiled for you.
That's right.
He turns into the Joker.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
So this is basically an origin story for the Joker, correct?
Yeah, I think that's what they would have you believe, although there's so many elements of this movie where you're in and out of the Arthur Fleck character's fantasy life that, I don't know, it's a little up in the air how much of it is really a Joker origin story, because, I mean, not to just jump ahead to the end, but there's an ending to this movie that may or may not imply that the whole thing is just a big fantasy in his head.
That's right. So when I saw it, I will be honest, I did not like the first 3/4 of the film. I feel like it was awful. It was uncomfortable. I didn't like it. I just didn't enjoy it as a movie. But then pretty much the last act ramped up immensely.
Yeah, it's pretty gripping. The last half hour of the movie, it's really hard to turn away from. And I think that's when Joaquin's performance really hits like a fever pitch. And he's able to do something with that Joker character that I haven't really seen in other live-action Batman movies, which is, by the end of the movie, he's pretty scary. You know, it's like the Joker's always really diabolical. Like the Heath Ledger Joker is obviously like a mastermind and is manipulating pieces on the game board before anybody even really knows there's a game board. The Nicholson Joker it's Nicholson. So there's like a great deal of kind of joy and mayhem to it. And I know that like the Mark Hamill Joker in the animated series and in the video games has gone to like a dark place, but I mean, this was the first time at the end of this movie, there's some moments where Joaquin's like legitimately pretty scary in that makeup.
He is, and I think what it's important to note is that he's not a smart Joker. Like, this guy's not highly intelligent. He's basically an abused boy who has mental issues that pretty much just snaps. So there's no like diabolical planning behind anything he does. Everything is pretty much accidental. It's
very reactionary, you know, and it's kind of funny. In a lot of ways, it sort of feels like maybe the filmmakers, like they watched the Nolan Joker movie probably to be like, okay, we've got to create our own version of this character. But it feels like what they grabbed onto is the Ledger line where he's like, I'm an agent of chaos. Because in truth, in The Dark Knight, yeah, he's an agent of chaos, but he's more of an architect of chaos. Like, he's the one, like, setting everything into motion. And in this version of it, the Joaquin Joker is very much an agent of chaos, but in the sense that there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's like you don't know what he's gonna do next and how. And he's like an unlikely and almost an accidental catalyst for everything that happens in Gotham. And he just kind of becomes the symbol.
So essentially the premise is that he's just this guy who lives at home, taking care of his mother, and he's got this condition where he laughs uncontrollably in uncomfortable situations.
Because he's had a traumatic head injury as a child, is what you find out.
Right.
And so that sort of becomes the motivation for like the Joker laugh.
Right, the Joker laugh, which by the way, after hearing it throughout the whole movie, it's like, it grates on you after a while.
It's disturbing.
You know, it really is.
It's disturbing, you know. And I think the first 2/3 of the movie, I mean, everybody knows this. This is no. They've been very vocal about this in the press. I mean, it's an homage to Taxi Driver, and it's an homage to you know, the like all of those great late 70s, like early 80s, like gritty character dramas, like all the Scorsese stuff.
So,
you know, I mean, so much so that De Niro's in the movie.
Right, he is.
And I mean, he's basically playing his character from the original King of Comedy. You know,
right?
It's interesting.
And so one of the fascinating things about this is that it does lead you to believe that it's taking place in 70s Gotham, right? Because it's got like this throwback with the outfits and the costuming.
They give you a cue, like at the end when the Waynes walk out of the famous movie. There's a double billing playing, and it's Blowout and it's Zorro the Gay Blade, and both of those movies came out in 1981. So this movie happens in 81 in Gotham.
81, okay.
You know, which of course, it posits, like, and that part of it was kind of my favorite thing because it posits to me a couple of interesting things, okay? Yes. So number one, Bruce Wayne, who's in this movie as a kid, is probably 12.
Yeah.
So if it's...
And this is major spoiler, but like obviously this leads up to the whole riot at the end that the Joker starts, which leads to his parents getting killed in the alley, and you see the beginning of Batman's.
But I feel like you kind of like you're obligated to do that in anything that like touches Batman. Like they've got to kind of bring it in, and I think we should talk about the absence of Batman in a little bit. But what's kind of interesting about this timeline is I guess he's a little young to fully put him in the timeline of the Keaton Burton 89 Batman, because I think in that, I mean, Bruce Wayne's supposed to be almost 30, I would guess, or at least in his early 30s, I think, and this would make him, you know, in his 20s. But it's like it's pretty close to that timeline. But for me, I don't know, I think the most joy I took out of that was so the Joker and Batman presumably live in a world where there is John Travolta. Because he's the star of Blowout, which is kind of great, but it also opens up the possibilities because, okay, so if they live in a world where there's John Travolta, they live in a world where there's Nicolas Cage. So they're for sure going to see Face Off at some point, but also that means that in this version of it, there is room for Nicolas Cage to play Superman in a Superman movie in the Batman DC like meta universe. Like when Superman shows up and is really big, it's like there is a world where the Nicolas Cage Superman movie happens, which is pretty exciting.
Which is also like really funny to me. So if we're looking at the Joker, now Joaquin Phoenix really looks like he's in his late 30s at least.
Yeah.
He's older in this, and Batman is 12 at the time. Okay, Bruce Wayne is a kid. So you have to think if Joker goes on to allow Bruce Wayne to become Batman throughout this whole rioting thing, when they battle later on, that would make Joker...
He's going to be like in his 50s or 60s.
Yeah, he's going to be like in his 60s.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of weird.
It is. I mean, I get, but like I guess if you look at the Burton Batman movie, how old was Jack Nicholson? He had to have been in his 50s, right? When he's like playing the Joker. So I mean, it's conceivable. And I think some of that is, I don't know how old Joaquin Phoenix is for real. I would assume he's in his early 40s, probably. But he's also so emaciated in the movie that it just makes him look a lot older as well. But still, there's a big age difference.
There is
it's
a
like
big age difference.
You almost think he should have run into like teenage Bruce Wayne.
Right.
Or like a Bruce Wayne that's a little bit more his age, who's maybe still like, you know, well, I guess then the Waynes would already have to be dead, so they couldn't do that.
Right.
You know, if they're going to tie it in. So it gets a little bit tricky.
And they also did this whole thing where, okay, so in the movie, the Joker finds out that his mom is pretty much like a crazy person. And that she thinks that he is the son of Bruce Wayne because they had an affair. Or not Bruce Wayne.
Of Thomas Wayne.
Thomas Wayne.
Yeah.
And so, because they had an affair. And so she keeps writing him letters saying he's a nice man, he'll get us out of this poverty, he cares about his staff members. And so she keeps this, and he's reading the letters that she's sending to him, and they claim that this is their son together. And so he goes to confront the Waynes and say, hey, you know, this is, like, I'm your son, and he keeps calling him dad and stuff like that. But then you find out she's really just a nut who abused him as a child and adopted him, by the way. So, and I guess he's blocked this all out.
Well, there's questions about that. I mean,
right?
So they set her up to have a mental illness, to be bipolar. And so she spent some time in Arkham, which is sort of the excuse to go visit Arkham Asylum at a certain point in it. But then when you find out that Arthur Fleck is adopted, and then he also has a mental illness, it's like he's not her direct son. So you kind of can't make the argument that like that was passed on like through genetics. And I understand that like you don't. There's many people around the world are struggling with a mental illness of some degree or another. So the coincidence factor of that is fine-ish, I guess, but it's kind of a looser thread in the movie. It's sort of like, what are the odds that your adopted son would have a sort of an even more powerful mental illness than you? And they sort of they explain it like it's like because he's a victim of abuse and suffers a traumatic suffers a traumatic head injury, which they sort of kind of point to as like maybe a cause for his behavior. But it's just a little clunky. It's like, I don't know that there's really was a need to make him adopted. He could have just been someone else's son.
Yeah, I think that whole part is a little bit, and and I also think the acting portion though from Joaquin Phoenix, by the way, is amazing. So honestly, it blew me away, especially at the end when he makes his entrance onto the Murray show, whatever his name is.
Robert De Niro.
Yeah, Robert De Niro's show.
Who's got the host of like a Tonight Show,
type thing in Gotham. And so basically, Joker has these fantasies that Murray is his dad, or loves him like a dad because he's watched him ever since he was small, and he feels like he knows him and everything else. And obviously, as you know through the trailer, that he feels like he knows him, and then they get this clip where they're making fun of him, and then he gets invited onto the show because of that. And so it's like a whole chain reaction type of thing. And so when he comes out onto the stage,
well, it's kind of the thing that they use to push him totally over the top is that like you're saying, like his big fantasy is to be a guest on this Tonight Show-esque program, the Murray Hamilton show, right? And so that's why he's trying to be a stand-up comedian. And so he looks up to this guy as like the closest thing to a father figure in his life. So when this guy starts making fun of his act on his show, that's kind of when the whole house of cards comes down for the Joker character. That's what pushes him over the top to become like a villain and sort of realize that he's the only one who gets his own jokes. Even though it seems like Gotham at large is starting to respond to it, and that's kind of the other big theme that's happening in the movie at the same time is this sort of idea of eat the rich and like class warfare between all these kind of impoverished citizens of Gotham versus kind of the rich elites, like the Thomas Waynes of the world. And so that's Todd Phillips' move to sort of anchor it into politics and things that are happening today. I mean, there's a lot of things about Thomas Wayne that are very Donald Trumpish in some ways. I mean, he's not to that sort of degree and extreme, but kind of sort of what kicks it off is Thomas Wayne referring to people protesting in the city kind of as clowns, and saying basically like I'm a rich industrialist, I'm a businessman, I know how to come in and clean up the city, like this is what everybody needs. It's very much like that attitude that sort of like helps spark this civil unrest like in Gotham, and then the Joker just kind of becomes a catalyst for it because he ends up killing a couple of Wayne employees like on the subway.
Which it's important to note that the actual killing of those three jerks that were being pretty much assholes to him on the train isn't really what starts it. It is Thomas Wayne getting on TV and calling him a clown that starts this unrest. And so it's not just like these three murders. It's just Wayne going on there and saying these were staff, and staff is like family, and blah, 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 and doing his whole shtick. And then criticizing the guy who killed him, which, it is really what people found so distasteful, which is happening like pretty much right now. It's just like... But here's the thing that I don't really like about the movie is the fact that one thing after another happens to this guy, this Joker, right? And so like every single thing, like, and
adjust your camera a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah, I was like,
this is maybe falling.
I was noticing it, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna.
If you saw the camera set up over here right now, it's pretty interesting.
Anyway. So it's kind of almost unbelievable to think that this many bad things can happen to one person. Like, I mean, seriously, how many times can he get this shit kicked out of him because he's just walking, like, just doing his life, you know? I don't know, maybe that's just Gotham, but at some point, you know, he fights back. He's on medications, blah, 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 you know, he's journaling, but just like one thing after another until, you know, some well-intentioned but not really coworker of his gives him a gun to protect himself because he keeps getting the crap kicked out of him so often. And that's, I think, like the catalyst that spurs on, like, he's like, I'm not allowed to have a gun because, you know,
because I have a mental illness.
I have a mental illness.
Yeah, and the guy's basically like, well, don't tell anybody.
Don't tell anybody, yeah.
You know, I mean, there's a lot going on that's definitely commenting on the world that we live in now. And while it circles some pretty decent points, ultimately, it ends up not really being about anything. You know, it kind of just ends up being a comic book movie when it's all said and done. I think just because there's no really new territory being blazed by the themes of the movie. I think in part because it's leaning so heavily on pastiche. It's leaning so heavily on the Scorsese movies like Taxi Driver. The end of the movie is straight out of Network. I mean, it's just kind of a grab bag of your favorite gritty character portraits, like from the 70s. You know, and while Joaquin Phoenix is really good in it, I think one thing that's a little bit limiting for him is he operates so much in a bubble in the movie because a lot of it is him with his mom in the apartment, or it's sort of him in his fantasy world with kind of one other character that he can't fully interact with because ultimately it's all got to be set up that it's, you know, all in his head. It's kind of doing like a Sixth Sense thing of like, oh, there wasn't a person in the room the whole time.
Right.
You know? So they can't really get into stuff. So like while he's good, it doesn't feel as complete of like a character study of this person devolving in a world that's sort of determined to kind of tear them apart and accelerate the process as it does when you watch a movie like Taxi Driver, just because of the way it's set up. And so, I mean, while Joaquin's good, it's like he's kind of swinging for the fences with what he's got. Ultimately, I don't know how much I really get to know about Arthur Fleck. I mean, I understand what his story is. I understand his plight, but... And
the thing that I actually... Okay, so one of the issues I had with the movie was, okay, so he has an next door neighbor, it's Zazie Beetz, and he briefly meets her in an elevator, you know, and she kind of has a kind word. Well, not even a kind word. Like, she's just with her daughter, and she just goes, oh, like, this place, am I right?
Well,
and, like,
and that's right out of Taxi Driver.
Right.
I mean, like, De Niro literally does that in Taxi Driver.
So, yeah, great, perfect, and it's what starts it, and he kind of starts to like her, and then this relationship between them happens, and then you find out that it's all been in his head. And so then it causes you to question literally everything else you've seen in the movie. Like, well, what else are we watching that's not actually happening?
Right.
What else is just in his head? You know, I mean, and so that's what's so confusing at the end, because you're like, okay, so is he the Joker? Did all of this happen? Or is this just him imagining that this is what happened?
Yeah, there's a button, not even really a button because it's not like it's after the credits, but kind of after the climax of the movie, we pick up with Arthur in Arkham Asylum talking to, you know, an analyst who he ultimately kills, and then that's kind of the end of the movie. But the way the conversation that he has with her, it could be interpreted a lot of ways. I mean, it could be interpreted that everything you've seen is 100% true and it's all happened, or that it could kind of all be in its head. And it feels like a little bit of a buyback opportunity. You know, one of those things where it's like, well, we really went for something kind of crazy with this movie and kind of different. If you hate it, we've got an opportunity to get out of it and be like, that wasn't the Joker, just kidding. Like, this was just, you know, this was a character suffering from mental illness in the world of Batman. You know, or if you love it, of course it's the Joker, and like, you know, here we go.
But then also, how did he get caught? Because they literally jumped from him like addressing the rioters on top of a cop car to like him being in an asylum. And you're like, well, how did he get there? Like,
I don't know. That didn't bother me as much because I think you have to assume that at a certain point a wave of riot cops floods into Gotham and just shuts it down. You know what I mean? Like breaks up those protesters and grabs them. I mean, at the end of the day, he's just a guy. You know, he's not. I mean, that's what's great about the Joker. It's the, you know,
with amazing makeup, by the way.
It was really creepy. It was
Makeup
it was the first time the makeup was pretty scary.
Yeah,
you know, it really was.
Especially at the end there, I was like, Jesus. Yeah, it was. It was hardcore. Okay, so now with all of this that we've seen, now before this movie came out, there was a lot of concerns that it was going to touch on the whole movement of. Like the incel movement, basically, of like these dudes who live with their moms and, you know, who have rough lives, who are depressed, have mental illness, and it was going to be like a call to action to them. And do you think that that's what this movie ended up being, or no?
No, I don't think so. There's a couple moments in it where it kind of gets close to what feels like a call to action moment, but I think ultimately it's not
believable enough.
No, and also too, it's not, at no point is Todd Phillips or the writers being like, you know what, a person like this should absolutely have his moment and his comeuppance. Like, they're not empowering him in a way so that it seems like it's a good thing for him to take out all of his issues like on the world. They don't. It's like he's sort of like a pressure cooker, and it's more of like a ticking time bomb. It's like, you know, this guy is gonna go off and do it, but they're not. At no point did I feel like they were ever setting it up like it was deservedly so.
I think the first 3/4 of the movie that I didn't like was because they're setting him up to be sympathetic, and I don't think the Joker is a character that deserves to have an explanation for his actions. And so, to me, making him this poor guy that you kind of feel sorry for because he's had such a rough life, and it's all because of his mom, and blah, 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 where you're just like, well, no wonder this guy cracked. And that's not something I like to see for the Joker character. The Joker character, to me, has always just been just evil. Like, basically, he's the one villain that Batman cannot conquer, you know, and that's what makes him so great, because every good hero needs a, you know, a great villain, and that's him. That's the Joker. And to give him this sympathetic backstory and have him be this not really that intelligent guy, just some mentally ill guy who's down on his luck, who's had a rough life, like I don't like that explanation, you know, for the Joker, to be honest. Although it's a good movie on its own. So now, what do we think about people who are saying that this movie, like him being the Joker, is the only thing that saved it? Otherwise, it would have been a really boring movie.
I think that's true. I don't think it would have been necessarily a boring movie, but I think it would have been a pretty forgettable movie, just because it would have been everything you've seen before. It's like, this movie isn't adding to the conversation about mental illness. It's not adding to the conversation about an anti-hero. It's not adding to the conversation really much of anything. You know, I think the fact that it is the Joker is what's made it like really successful. And I think, to your point too, what for me watching this, one of the big reactions that I had that was pretty unexpected is I really felt like this movie could use some Batman. Like, I've never really missed. I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna miss Batman in this movie. But what you realize is that without that diametrically opposed point of view, the Joker just doesn't work as well. You know, it's like, what makes the character an effective villain is he's everything that Batman is not, and you kind of need to see them go at it and butt ideologies. Otherwise, I don't know, it just feels like it's missing something. Because also, I don't feel like I need to learn any fundamental life lessons or get any deeper insights into the human condition through the character of the Joker. Like, it's just not, it's not a good, for me, it's not like a good avenue to get all that stuff. And when that character is the main character in your film, you have a villain who by nature, like, can't be redeemable. Like, if you think about it, when they make movies about villains, like when they make movies about characters like Snake Plissken in Escape from New York, or even like more recently, even if you look at a character like Deadpool, like, they're always rehabbing the characters. It's like by the end of it, whatever it is that whatever journey they've gone on has made them in a way like a de facto hero. I think
It's happening again.
I don't know if this is gonna work.
Sorry,
Hang on.
guys.
Hold, please. Wait. I don't know.
I can't see. Hold on. Hang on. I'm just gonna. There we go.
There we go. Better. So this is.
It's very janky. Sorry. Haha.
Ah, there we go.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. What were we talking about?
Oh, we're talking about like rehabbing characters. So if you think about like even like Deadpool or a character like that, you know, by the end of the journey, they've gone through a process that's made them like a de facto hero. Even though they might do stuff that's pretty crazy and extreme, you're rooting for them by the end of the movie. With the Joker, you can't do that. So you're setting up a true villain that's going to be a villain by the end of it. And so when you walk out of the theater, you're just a little bit wiped out. You know, it's just because that's what it has to be.
It was definitely a rough journey, and you know, we had a lot of discussions about this last night, like on walking back from the theater, because it's one of those movies where, oh my gosh, like I was literally thinking to myself, I don't like this movie, like halfway through it, and then all of a sudden it just picks up and it goes, and then you have all these things to think about, and you're just like, oh my gosh. So I guess in a way, that's positive.
Well, we're talking about
Right,
it.
we're talking
we're
about
thinking about it. It's like the world is thinking about it. I mean, the box office numbers have been staggering. I mean, I feel like there's no universe where there's not a Joker Part 2 or a Joker Part 3. It's like, you know, it's like they're going to keep going with it for sure. And it'll just be interesting to see at what point, if ever, it dovetails back into the DCU.
Right.
You know, it's like, or if it's just going to be its own kind of like parallel path and like standalone things.
I definitely don't think people rushed out to see this. I feel like people were really hesitant. And that's why, I mean, it took us a whole week. I mean, obviously, I was in New York at New York Comic Con, so we didn't see it.
People rushed out to see it. I mean, it had the biggest opening weekend for an October movie in history.
Okay, because I've heard nothing about it online until like literally this week.
No, I mean, it's
a lot of people loved it. A lot of people were meh. It's really weird. I've heard no one hate it though. Well, everyone was just kind of like, I don't know how I feel.
Well, you know, it's funny. It's like I think like this movie in particular is a great example of what kind of the online chatter about things has become, okay? Because before people saw this movie, right? Before critics saw this movie, before it won the Venice Film Festival, and then before it had its Toronto debut, where there's a big critical backlash, fans of this material had sort of already crafted their narrative of what this movie was going to be. It's like they had already sort of decided that it was going to have all of these themes and do all this stuff, and it was going to have this kind of an impact, and there was this huge groundswell of anticipation for it. And then when reviews started to come out, and I think everybody sort of realized that maybe it wasn't as deep and profound as people thought, it's interesting to see how the online chatter has really still held on to that narrative, that aspirational narrative of what they wanted it to be, versus the movie that it is. And I think, honestly, it's like that's going to be a big trend that we're going to see more and more, is this sort of kind of preconceived notion of what the movie is going to be, and then people still trying to force that narrative onto the reality of like what it becomes. And so I think people still want the Joker to be about more than it really is. You know, it's like, will Joaquin Phoenix get nominated for an Oscar? Maybe. I don't know. The critical backlash against the movie might prevent that. Plus, it's like Academy voters tend to be old white people. Like, I don't know if old white people like this movie, unless it's just a real nostalgia pull from, you know, from Taxi Driver and stuff. But also, it's not. It doesn't have that kind of weight to it, you know. But I will say, it's like a lot of times when you get nominated for an acting award, like for the Oscars or for really anything, sometimes it's not for the best acting, but for the most acting. And like, and Joaquin Phoenix is really going for it in this. I mean, he does a lot of acting, you know, and at times it's very good and very engaging, and at other times you can just feel him trying to wring every moment out of this character, because also, I mean, what else do you do? You know, it's like, I think you've just gotta sort of go for it. So we'll see how this shakes out over award season.
Yep.
But I think this has gone from being in everyone's mind like a lock to winning a whole bunch of awards to like, we'll see.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep, I agree. And that about does it for our time. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about Joker
it's easy.
with me.
I live here. So
yeah.
It's easy.
All right. RuthAnn and I will be back next weekend. We will see you guys then. Until then,